but you are connected to Jesus. And is there anybody in Zion and on the first night of revival, your testimony is that the only reason that I'm surviving the hell I'm going through is because Jesus has been keeping me. As I look back over my life and as I think things over, I can truly say that I've been blessed. God's tired of me. Here it is. Let me push my way. You are going to live a life for Christ. You got to live a life that's stable. Got to live a life that's positioned. But then thirdly, you got to live a fruitful life. You got to live a fruitful life. Here's what the text says. The book says, it says here, he says, which yields its fruit in its season. He says it yields its fruit in its season. It lets us know here that when you're living a life for God, that every season ain't for you to be successful. Every season ain't for you to be in the front. Every season ain't for you to have your name in lights. Every season, it ain't for you to get called on by the pastor every Sunday. But the Bible says that you still have got to have some fruit. Here it is what the Bible says this. It says that you shall know a tree by the fruit it bears. I knew y'all was going to know that. Pastor Prentice, I know he says that all the time. He says that you shall know a tree by the fruit it bears. It lets us know that if we're living a life for God, there ought to be some fruit on your tree. And later for the day of folk that come to church, on a ministry, got a parking spot, and don't got no fruit on their tree. Smile at you in worship and cuss you out on the parking lot. I'm sorry, I might not get invited back. He says here that if you're living a life for Christ, you got to be fruitful. He says here that not only do you need to be stable, not only do you need to be positioned, not only do you need to be fruitful, but then fourthly, the text helps us to see that you've got to be sustained. It lets us know that if you're sustained, that the Bible says, whose leaf shall not wither. You got to live a life that's sustained by God. Can I tell you that you oftentimes, many of us want to be sustained by everything but the right thing. I got a couple degrees, I know what I said, by everything. I'm from Baltimore, and this is how I talk sometimes. He says that you got to live a life that's been sustained. Can I tell you who takes good care of me? It's the Lord who takes good care of me. It's the Lord who helps to open doors for me. And too oftentimes, we get what I like to call anointed amnesia. Because once we get saved, we forget that it was God who saved us. You know, in the old church, we used to say, I know y'all saying, he young. Why he talking about the old church? I grew up around old people. Leave me alone. We say that you pulled yourself up by your own bootstraps. But can I tell you that none of us in here have pulled ourselves up by our own bootstraps? Because some of us know that we ain't have no bootstraps from the beginning. And we've got to make sure that we live a life that's sustained by God. A life that lets people know that I was once lost in sin. But if it had not been for the Lord, And too oftentimes we take the credit for ourselves. But I wonder, there's about 25 folk in the house, and your testimony is that it was nobody but the Lord who woke me up this morning. Nobody but the Lord who started me on my way. Nobody but the Lord who gave me a reasonable portion of health and strength. It was nobody but the Lord. I'm almost done, I promise. He says here that you got to be stable, you got to be positioned, you got to be fruitful, you got to be sustained. But then lastly, that you got to make sure that you prosper. Here it is. The Bible says, and whatsoever they do shall prosper. You got to understand that when a tree is planted, that most people don't like to plant trees. Because planting a tree is a dirty job. Y'all remember that show, Mike Rowe, Dirty Jobs? Yeah. You know, planting trees is a dirty job. Nobody wants to plant trees. But the text helps us to see that if you are planted of God, then you will prosper. Do me a favor, just point at your neighbor for the second time and say, you gonna prosper. Come on, point to somebody else and tell them that you will be successful. Point to somebody else and tell them you will be blessed. Point to somebody else and tell them this is not the end of your story, but you will prosper. He says here that you will prosper. You got to understand that planting trees is dirty job. And I went down to North Carolina as a child, and every summer we would spend time down in North Carolina. And on my family's property, we had a church on the property. And the church had a cemetery out on the property. And when somebody would die, that they would just bury them in the backyard. But then the person that managed the cemetery was also a person that knew about planting. And I got to a place where I had a conversation with the gentleman, and the gentleman told me that working in a cemetery and working on a farm was a lot alike. I said, what do you mean, sir? He said, well, when you are working in the cemetery, you go out and you dig a hole. And when you dig a hole, you put a body down in the ground. You take the dirt and you put the dirt back over top of the body. He says, you come back in a few weeks or a few months and there's nothing there but a little bit of grass. He said, nothing will be there. But he said, when it is that you are planting trees, you go out into the field, you mark the spot, you dig a hole, and you plant a seed.